Good afternoon, everybody. So today we are going to be sharing about flipping the classroom. So first of all, my name is Megan Kelly. If you watch any of the webinars, you probably see my face a couple of times. I'm a principal in this very unified school district, and I'm out sometimes. There we go. I think we're back. Okay. So it looks like we're still broadcasting. Sorry for that little hiccup there. That tends to just how it operates sometimes when you're doing this alone, I think. So I am going to drop my presentation for today into the comments section of both YouTube and Facebook. So you should be able to click on that and access that from whichever method you are on right now and whichever place you are at. Some of these things, as you can see, are a little bit out of date, and I've not updated my titles on all this, but this is going to be a copy of the presentation for you to look at. So today I'm going to be sharing about flipping the classroom, which is something that I did for many years while I was teaching, and it's something that I present and consult on pretty regularly still because I'm a huge fan of the flipping the classroom process. So as we go through this, I am going to talk about it in terms of when I was in the classroom and teaching and how that looked then, but also talk about some ideas of how you can use it during distance learning. As we have said before, please do not hesitate to drop any comments or questions in the chat. I will try to respond as quickly as I can. If I don't respond in the chat, I'll just try to respond on air. So let's just jump right in. I don't think we need to know any more about me. Let's get to the important stuff. So to begin, I always start about talking about technology and the purpose behind it, not just the tool. So if we are thinking about flipping the classroom, what is the why behind it? And originally, and this was when we were not in the distance learning phase, the purpose for me was to have students work on this. And oh, I did not project my screen, so let me pull this up. That way you can see it on your screen and on mine. But the purpose of doing this flipped classroom approach very much for me was to allow more class time in class to do things like project-based learning or inquiry type projects. And by flipping the classroom, that allowed me to do that, but also spend more time with students in small groups. So it was kind of twofold for me, that I could spend time in class teaching and instructing, which of course I did, but I could also have some of that front loaded before they entered into class. So the idea with a flipped classroom is that the typical teaching model is reversed, where the teaching is done at home and then the homework, for lack of a better word, is done in class. So how that looked for me is that I usually taught one new lesson per week, and then we would do some sort of skills practice and then some sort of project or inquiry-based project in our class. So the front loading would be at the beginning, and then the skills and project stuff would be kind of interspersed throughout that week. So the flipped classroom lessons that I always did were not very long either, and they were always between, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes. Once in a while, with some really difficult topics, they might take a little bit longer. But when I did flipped classroom, what I thought was very important, and I'll try to make this a little bit bigger for you guys right now, is that there were definitely some benefits. Like I mentioned, the idea was for them to complete this at home. But if we're asking students to do stuff at home, because I'm not always a big fan of the typical style of homework, we have to ask them to do something that is meaningful and achievable. Particularly when I think of math as my background, and I think that sending math home when they get to 7th and 8th grade or freshmen, sophomores, that tended to be the age range that I taught, it became very hard for the parents to be able to help with that at home. However, sending home notes was very meaningful because it's something they could refer to later, but it was also achievable because it was simply the note-taking process. Now, that being said, I also did add some questions to check for understanding in between, which I'll talk more about in just a moment. But the students could take their notes at their own pace. And a lot of my students really appreciated this because my students that wrote very quickly were able to go quicker, and my students that wrote more slowly were able to go slower. In addition to that, I also had quite a few students that would like to go back and look at the notes again. And just kind of as a reference, Like I've been kind of alluding to, I taught 7th through 10th, 11th grade math at some point during my career, and particularly did flipped classroom with 7th through 10th graders. And this is from everything from regular classes to collab classes to honors classes. So I saw success across all areas of the grade levels and ability levels. Okay. The teacher can offer more supports and activities in project-based learning. And this was a big piece to me because I wanted to do more of those projects and more of that project-based learning. But I also wanted to do more small group work and more individual support. It was very helpful for me in that because as a middle school or high school teacher, you get a limited amount of time with your students per day. So I already front-loaded some of that information in to our day, then they could be broken off into different groups based on where they were at. So a little more precise, it allowed an opportunity to work with students in smaller groups. So just like saying that personalized instruction, I'm going to give a little more of the details of what that looked like. Now, in the time that we're thinking about right now, we're in this distance learning strategy. The classroom is a great way to offer support and instruction to your students. I don't think it's something that should be done every day, but it could be something that's done every week. It just depends on how your school or your district has set up your distance learning model. I caution a lot of new material during this time. To be very honest, when you think about the students that you have to think about what are they able to do on their own and what are appropriate expectations for them to do on their own at home with possibly support, but also with the possibility of no support. So the flipped class model can be very helpful. That is just kind of my slight warning on material. So the idea for me in flipped classroom was that it became from teacher-centered to more student-centered learning. And education has quite shifted that way in the last, I would say 5, 6, 7 years. And the idea is that we put more of this learning into the hands of the student. And by being able to add in more of those project-based learning activities, I did a lot of tutorials in class. I was able to bring that idea into our classroom. So if you're just tuning in, kind of what I was talking about right now was the idea of it's important to know the why behind how we flip our classroom. I'm not one just to say, hey, we need to use this tool because it's a super awesome tool, but what is the reason for why we do what we do? Why do we use these tools? What's the purpose behind it? And I think that why is always important for driving your instruction. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it looked in my classroom. So that way, if you want to take this model into next year, you can. Or if you might be able to even take pieces of this and add it into your distance learning experience right now. So for me, what I had was I had the students complete notes at home. And this also included questions to check for understanding that were automatically graded so that I knew where students were at when they came into class that day. Based upon that, I would then split students into 3 different groups. So again, I would assign this on a Monday, give them the foldables or the papers that they would need for class. And then from there, they would do their notes at home. They would answer some questions, which would automatically be graded that I could then split students off into groups for more personalized instruction the next day. So the first group was what was called an intervention tutorials with a teacher. This is where the students were really struggling. They got maybe several of the problems wrong, and I would only give maybe 2 to 4 problems to check for understanding for them to do during their notes. But these students struggled. Either they got all of them wrong or most of them wrong, and they needed a quick reteaching from the teacher to clarify any questions that they had about the lesson. The second method, the second group that I had was intervention tutorials that were led by students. These students were probably maybe got half or more of them right. They didn't get all of them right. They didn't get none of them right. They were kind of somewhere in the middle. So these students were very much able to lead their own groups to look at the problems that they did and check with each other on what did they do wrong. And I really taught them to use it kind of in a Socratic way where they had to ask the person that was presenting the problem that had gotten it wrong at the board. They had to present their problem, and then that table would ask them questions to guide them towards the correct answer. So the last group that I had would be in enrichment groups. So these students either got most of them or all of them right, and they were ready for the next assignment, activity, or project or something. Sometimes they worked on their stock market projects. Sometimes they had breakout EVU games to play, or sometimes they might even, if I also kind of structured my classroom in a way where if they wanted to get ahead on certain things, they were able to do that during that time too. So that's just kind of how that looked in my classroom. And again, you might be able to do something similar like this during distance learning. It just might be a little bit complicated. But I'm hoping that as I'm speaking, maybe you're brainstorming some ways that you can use this year or next year. So just to let you know what this looks like, and if you're familiar with EdPuzzle, I'll talk about this a little bit more later. And their program, it looks a little bit different on here now. This is a little bit of an old picture, but it's not far off. So again, the first group was the intervention tutorials with a teacher. So these students usually received less than a 60% on the questions, and then they would review the questions. A student would go to the whiteboard, they would present their problem, and the teacher and the students at the table would ask them questions to help them understand where they went wrong. The next group, like I mentioned previously, they were somewhere between a 60 to 80% range. They were in student-led intervention groups. They basically were able to lead themselves to understanding where they went wrong in that flipped classroom approach. Simply brainstorming here, this is a really great way that you could even have meetings right now with distance learning. Students could lead their own tutorial groups or create their own groups to meet from a distance on problems they got wrong to get help. It's just that they're going to need a lot of coaching in that right now because that's not going to come natural to them. And the last group was the enrichment groups. As you can see on here, they all did really well. It's all green, it's all pretty. They all got 100s. They all watched the entire video. And now they are off to work on their 20-time projects or games or activities. They've got lots of different options on what they can do at that point. I always try to give options in class of what it is that they can do. So again, this is the why behind why I flip. I am going to get into the how and how you do that. But I always think when we use technology tools, it's important to talk about the why first, because we shouldn't be tool-centered. We should be instruction and student-centered. All right, now speaking of the tool, I'm going to share 4 steps with you for flipping the classroom. And this is how I did it. You can do it this way, but you don't have to do it this way. And it's just a way that I felt like worked really well for me. And I built many years and many classes worth of flipped classroom materials based upon this method. I think at this point I have all 7th, 8th, and 9th grade math flipped classroom lessons. So if you are a math teacher, make sure to hit me up and I will send those over to you. So I'm going to kind of start popping out of the presentation at this point and going back and forth. So if I don't go back to it really well, I apologize for that, but you've got it to refer to later. But the first step in flipping the classroom is to create some sort of presentation. And for me, I just tended to default to Google Slides. It's what was in the G Suite already. I was very comfortable with it. And I'll give you a quick look of what that looks like. So for me, this is an example of one that I have created, and this was last year. But as you can see, there's just a question at the beginning about what they're going to learn. These tend to have different animations and things set up in it. You can see that there are steps, and these steps, again, have animations to go step by step. And a lot of times what I would do is I would also use this page marker tool that you'll probably see at the very top here. There are tools in Screencastify that do the same. It seems really dumb, but Screencastify used to have a very thick pen, and it wasn't great for doing math. It's a lot better now. But I would often use the page marker tool to do some of the math on the pages, because that just, as a math teacher, that made it much more simple. I had 2 different things that I used at the time. One thing that I had was like a drawing tablet that plugged in with a USB into my computer. And then eventually I got a touchscreen Chromebook, and that's how I ended up doing my lessons. But page marker is a great tool. So as you can see, it's not a very complicated lesson. I would imagine this one, it's a little bit longer than most of mine normally are. So I would say this was probably around the 15-minute range. My students were older, so they were a little bit better at handling that. If you're elementary, then it might be a little bit, you would know what's best for your kids. I'm not going to try to speak to elementary and what would be most appropriate for them, because I lived in secondary world for a long time. But this is just an example of a presentation that I created. So that's the very first step. As you can see, it's very simple. You just have to create a presentation. And if you have a great PLC group, or whatever you call it in your district, your team, you can split that up and different people can work on different lessons. I know some departments that are in my district, that's how they would do. They would say, okay, I'm going to do writing linear equations, I need you to do graphing linear equations, and then you're going to do this and split it up so that that workload is a little bit less. And that's the wonderful thing about if you have a good PLC is you can share that load, because flipping the classroom is a lot of work. I'm not going to lie to you and say that it's easy. It took a lot of time, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I would often redo it a million times and re-record, and it became a running joke in my house. So if you can find other people to collaborate with, that would be an excellent idea to kind of share that load. So the first step was to create a presentation. Now, if this is my normal kind of way that I present this, I would give you guys some time to create your presentation. But since I'm doing this live, and then eventually some people will be watching it asynchronously, I'm not going to wait awkwardly for 5 minutes for people to kind of start creating a presentation. So the second step is to record via Screencastify. It doesn't have to be Screencastify, but I just tend to be a huge Screencastify fan and have been for many, many years. And what I would do is I would then take that presentation and record with Screencastify. I am going to drop this link to Screencastify in the comments, so that way if you want to visit the site, you can. It also has the ability for you to add that extension during that when you're on this page. So as you can see, mine says already installed. Yours, if you don't have it installed, might say install to Chrome. You do have to be on Chrome to be able to do that, though. You can't be on another platform. So Screencastify ends up at the top of your bar where all your extensions show up, and it looks just like this. You can see mine pop up right now. And there are 3 different modes for recording your screen. The first way is that you could have the browser tab. Now that means just everything that you see in here. Right now I'm casting my desktop, which is why you can see these other tabs. And if I were to leave this whole thing, you could actually see my desktop computer as well. When I was recording my notes, I would say 90% of the time I just recorded my tab, because I wasn't popping in and out of these screens, and I was just staying in one screen at a time. If I were needing to go back and forth, and sometimes maybe if I was doing something on Desmos or something like that, I would do that. But most of the time, I would just record a tab. So desktop is very similar. It's going to record your whole desktop. You can pop in and out of tabs. And then webcam would be if you wanted to record your face. So what you see on the screen right now, when you see my face, that's my webcam recording me. You'd have to set up your camera access. One thing I love about Screencastify is that it automatically saves into your Google Drive if you set it up that way. A couple more things that it has is some other options. It can count down. You can turn on drawing tools. You can even show a webcam preview. And what that means is that you can set it up so that the webcam is kind of like how I have it right now as you're watching this broadcast off to the side. But I think Screencastify gives you the choice to put it down at the bottom right or the bottom left or the top, wherever you want to put that. So when you set this up, if you haven't used it before, it's pretty nice because it will walk you through a tutorial of how do you want to set it up? Do you want it to go to Drive and whatnot? But to record, it's very simple. So I'm just going to do my browser tab. I'm going to click record. I have mine set up so that it counts down, or it should count down in just a second. I can hear it say 3, 2, 1. My drawing tools are down here, and they are a lot better than they used to be. I know it seems like a really stupid thing, but the pen on this used to be like 5 times the size of this, which as a math teacher was not great for writing. It's much, much better now. You can change the color of the pen if you want to. Erase, I can erase a little bit at a time, or if I come down to the eraser, I can wipe the entire screen at once. If I need to be able to move around, I can go back to mouse pointer and I can click around in my presentation. Okay. I didn't normally show it in this view. What I did when I would present is I would do present and then I would start presenting from there. Or sometimes I would click this exit full screen and just make it a little bit smaller. And that way I could do that, but it doesn't really show on my how I'm screening right now. So that is and that's pretty much it. So this just shows a good example. I love how Screencastify has this little red circle here too, so you can see where the mouse is. It's just a really great tool to be able to use. When you are done recording, you just come back up and you can hit stop. And what it's going to do is it's going to then pop up another window in a moment of the video that I was recording. Now, one thing that I do want to note is that, remember when I said earlier, it's going to ask you where you want it to share to. You can share it to your drive. If you set it up that way, it will automatically go that way. Okay. If not, you could share it to the Google Classroom, publish to YouTube. You could get an embed code. You have a whole bunch of different options. You can even send it in an email. You could generate a QR code, or you can just simply download it to your desktop. Okay. And that is going to be the way that we end up doing it in just a moment, is that we're going to download it to the desktop. Okay. I'm just going to pull out of this view for a moment because I don't know how scary my downloads folder is right now. And I'm going to pull everything out of there so that way I don't have to hunt for it. It seems like that's probably a little bit of an OCD thing that I've got going on there. And the reason that I'm going to download it rather than just share it to Classroom is you can totally do that, but I need to download it so that I can upload it to EdPuzzle in a second, because that's going to be our third step. Now, one feature that I use a lot, and this is kind of a side note, is I do like to use the, I don't know how you say it. I say GIF. Some people say GIF. But I like to use the export to GIF a lot for other different projects. Like if I need to show some different features, it's a really cool way to just download things as well. So that should download to my drive. I can see it down there. I'm just going to hunt and make sure that it shows up here in a second. All right, great. So as you can see, it showed up right here in my drive, which is fantastic. And this is my actual drive, not my Google Drive, right? This is my computer. So what is great about that is now I can go back to our next step. And just to refresh, remember our first step was to create a presentation. Our second step was to record via Screencastify. And now our third step is to upload and edit it via EdPuzzle. Okay, so when I upload to EdPuzzle, I first need to go to the EdPuzzle site, which I am going to drop here for you guys in the comments as well. And remember, if you have any comments at any point, please drop those into the live chat or the comments section, whichever you're on, whether YouTube or not. Please, please, please feel free to drop that over. So if you aren't familiar with EdPuzzle, I'm just going to kind of walk you through it real quick. So EdPuzzle is a really great website. It's probably one of my favorites, and I used it all the time in the classroom. And for some reason, it still thinks I'm at like a school that I was at several schools ago. I just can't seem to get that piece disconnected. And I probably haven't tried hard enough, to be honest. But when you log into EdPuzzle, you're immediately taken to this page. And what's nice is you can look at your content. You can look at the content of your school. And you can also look at different popular channels. This is stuff where if you didn't want to create the video, you can probably find a video that's already been created somewhere. Okay. And that just makes it super, super nice because I would use this feature actually a lot. I love to create my own ones, and I pretty much did that 90% of the time. But if I had students that were struggling, I always had an intervention page on our classroom website that had other videos that I had found on here. And let's say I was looking for something on integers and my students needed help with integers. Let's be a little bit more specific. And I could come in here and I could find some that were in the EdPuzzle section that already had questions that were embedded in between. And the way you know that it has questions is you can see these little dots down at the bottom. And over here, it'll tell you that here's the question that you would be asking the students. And I can just skip for right now, and I can see a little bit later in the video, and this looks like he's rapping math. So that's pretty cool because the kids would kind of like that. I haven't seen this video before. And sometimes I geek out a little bit with the math stuff, right? But you can see that there's some multiple questions that are embedded through the entire thing. That is a great feature of the EdPuzzle videos that are already here located under EdPuzzle. Whereas if I go to YouTube and look up another video, it's not going to have any of those questions embedded in because it's pulling from YouTube and adding to EdPuzzle. Pro tip, okay, it depends on how your district has this set up, but you might have to go in and approve certain videos from YouTube first to be able for it to show up on EdPuzzle. Again, it just depends on how your district has set it up. Ours has it set up so I could put like, mark this video as safe, and then I could search for it on YouTube. But there's a lot of popular channels, and let's say that I liked a video that I found on YouTube more than I found one on that was on the EdPuzzle category. I could then make a copy of it and then add my own questions to it. So let me just find one on adding integers. As you can see down here, I can assign it straight to a class, or I could make a copy of it, or I could edit it. And if I click edit, it's going to make a copy of it anyways. Clicking the copy is just a way to kind of add a quick copy to your library and go back to it later. So for our video specifically, we're going to go over to my content. I already have lots of folders in here from different things that I've done. And it's great because you can totally organize that. So I could look in my integrated one folder and I can see different units that I had and the different videos that were in there and go back to those later. I could even click on them and then choose to assign, edit, move it to a different folder, duplicate it, or delete it. Now, if I want to, I can add my own content by using the Add Content button from up above. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose to upload a video, and I'm going to choose a file, and we're going to choose that file that I had from my downloads folder, and I'm going to upload it. And it's going pretty quickly. We'll see how well it does. There's been a little bit of a lag lately, to be honest, with EdPuzzle, and I think it's just because so many people are using it with distance learning right now. But as you can see, it loaded it pretty quickly. And now it's preparing it. And when it's done preparing, then I can edit that video. So I think it's going to take some time. Like I said, it used to not take very much time at all. But I do think because there's so many people using it for distance learning, it's taking much longer these days. So I'm just going to kind of snag one that I've already got, and I'm going to edit that one. And what that looks like here is this is a copy of one that I've already got. So let's say that this is the video that you recorded. This is kind of the fun part is that, oops, it looks like it's assigned to a class. So I'm going to need to duplicate it so that way I can edit it. And I'm going to go back to my content. And now I can find my copy of a copy. And now you can see that I can edit it. So what happened a second ago was basically that it was already assigned to a class, so it won't allow you to edit it once it's already been assigned to a class. But that's okay, you can always make another copy. So when I click edit, that's going to take me into this edit menu. And there's a couple different options you've got here. First, you can cut it and trim it. You can't cut in the middle, so you can't like keep the beginning, cut out a chunk in the middle, and then keep the end. You can only trim from the end, so from the beginning or the end. Now, there's also the option to do a voiceover, but in this case for me, if I'd already recorded over my lesson and already talked, I don't really need that option. Sometimes people will use that to replace a video's existing audio. So maybe if you found one you really liked on EdPuzzle, but you don't like the speaker, you could talk over it and explain what he's doing during that time. It's also useful for students to have it in a different language too, if that's something that you might think your students might benefit from. Now, the last part, this is the one that I used all the time, and this is the questions. Because I was looking for a quick skill check, and this wasn't one of my more inquiry-based or project-based learning lessons, I usually tended to use multiple choice questions, which, if you know me, I'm not a big fan of multiple choice questions, but because I was sending them home with this on a Monday night to do, I needed to be able to immediately check their scores the next day in class and put them in groups pretty quickly. So multiple choice tended to be a good option. Now, what I did instill in my students was that even if they got them all right, if they were still struggling and just didn't understand, they always had the option to go to a group and get extra support. Even if they got 100%, if they're like, oof, I just don't feel confident in this, they always had that option to go to a group. Now, if I wanted to add a question, I just need to drag the kind of dot down here that you'll see to where I want to add that question. And then I can pick one of these three. The multiple choice question is the one I already talked about, which is pretty self-explanatory. An open-ended question is a question that students can put in a response, but it is going to have to be later graded by a teacher. And then a note is just something to tell the students. And sometimes I would use that to say, hey, this is really important. Make sure that you put this down in your interactive notebook. So that was definitely a feature that I used once in a while. But if I want to add a question, I just need to drop it where I need it and then click what question type I want. So maybe I want to say, I don't know, it's not going to relate to this lesson at all, but what is 2 plus 2? And I could put in 4, which you can see there's like, it might be a little bit hard for you to see, but there's a green check right here. That means that's the correct answer. There's a red X here, which means that's the wrong answer. And I could add additional wrong choices if I want to. Or if I wanted additional right answers, I could just change that to a green check mark, and that means either of those would be correct answers. Once I'm done, I just click save. And now you'll see that a little arrow showed up down here right underneath, and that adds and tells us where a question is, okay? Again, you can add an open response question. I'll show you one that looks like that. If it'll let me click on it. Oh, maybe that was, so explain how to compare slopes, and then that would just open it up. And then again, that's something I would have to regrade later, okay? Now, when you're done, all you have to do is you just click finish. So you click finish, and then it's going to ask you, what do you want to do with your video? You could just leave it there for now if you want to, but I'm going to assign it to one of my classes. And I'm going to assign it to my test class and assign it to all students. Now for me, I didn't tend to put a due date on it just because I track due dates in my gradebook, but I did always select prevent skipping. Doesn't mean the kids can't just turn on the video and let it cycle through, but it was kind of one of my favorite things to see at the beginning of the school year when they would turn on the video, because we always did the first one in class, and you would hear a few kids go, what, you can't skip it? And it kind of a little bit more forced them to watch the entire thing from start to finish. So I can assign that to the class. And now I'll see that it shows up here. Now my classes are located up here. And if I were to go to my test class, I can see all these different things that are assigned to it. I don't have any students in here right now, so that's why it's saying 0 out of 0. But if I did have students in here, I could look at their results, which was very similar to what you were seeing earlier right here. So just as a quick reminder, it would look a little bit different, a little bit more updated, but very close to it. It would tell you if they watched the entire video. The X would be if they didn't watch the entire video. And then the check mark would say they did watch the entire video. And then it will leave the percentage score, or however you set it up, for however many they got right. I did not give my students 100 questions. Like I said, mine were normally between 2 to 4 or 5, usually no more unless they were really easy. Again, here's another example. They turn yellow if they did a little bit better, and green if they did really great. Now, another great thing with EdPuzzle is that it can absolutely connect with Google Classroom and import all of your students as well. There's also a great gradebook feature that's worth checking out now too. But that's pretty much how you create your flipped classroom piece through EdPuzzle. Now, kind of what I was mentioning before is that checking for understanding piece I felt like was very, very important, because I didn't want my students just to write notes and not really be thinking about what they were writing, which is a really possible thing for our kids to do. And I think we can all say that at some points, that we're taking notes and not really thinking about what it is that we were taking notes on. By embedding those questions to check for understanding, I was able to help them self-check themselves on how they understood the material, also kind of help force them to pay a little bit better attention. But also then it did lead to that good group work the next day. So honestly, I do think the questions to check for understanding are the most critical parts of this whole process. The taking the notes is one thing, but having them check their work and see how they're doing is definitely another. And the way I kind of set it up was they had an interactive notebook, and on the left side, they had their questions that they were going to answer, and the right side was all of their notes, okay? The right side was only where their notes could go, and they could add an extension to the bottom that could be folded up in their notebook if they wanted to go further and write more notes. But I do think that piece is super, super important. Okay, so just as a quick refresher, when we think about our steps, our first step again was to create a presentation. Okay, again, Google Slides just tends to be my go-to. Second step was to record it with Screencastify. If you don't like Screencastify, you could check out other options like Loom is a really good one. I'm hearing some good stuff about Screencast-O-Matic lately, which I wasn't a fan of originally, but I'm starting to hear more good things these days. But I love Screencastify. Oh, one thing I did not talk about with Screencastify. It has a 10-minute limit unless you have the paid option, which is not very expensive. I don't think it's more than $30 a year. If it is, I felt like it was worth it. But if you don't need more than 10 minutes and you don't mind the Screencastify logo, then the free version is plenty for you. However, if you do want more than 10 minutes, which I certainly did as a secondary teacher, and not much more than that, but somewhere again between normally 10 to 15, once in a while, a little bit more than 15, that paid option is pretty helpful. All right, and that third step again was to edit via EdPuzzle. Now, the last step is the most simple step, and it's just to share with your students on whatever method it is, whatever LMS, your learning management system that you use. I actually was kind of a little bit unique in the sense that I had two different ways that I shared with students. I had a Haiku Classroom, which was just basically a website, and a Google Classroom. Now, I use the Haiku Classroom, which is now PowerSchool Learning through them. And I would use that to just keep all the static information in there that I didn't really want to go away and get bombarded by the stream. Because it really wasn't until the last year that Google Classroom became really useful. And then I was kind of in and out of the classroom, and then in this position now where I'm not using Classroom as much. I think you could do all this through Google Classroom now. I just really liked being able to have it in a place where I could edit it the next year and not start from scratch. I constantly change things from year to year. However, I did like to keep some stuff the same so I didn't have to change everything, which I felt like was going to be a little bit more work in Google Classroom. Personal preference, whatever works best for you and your kids is what you should do. But that really is the fourth step, and it's just to share. And if you are going to share on EdPuzzle, let me show you how we're going to do that real quick. You could just click to share the assignment. And first of all, if they log into EdPuzzle and they're already in your EdPuzzle class, then they'll be able to automatically see that at the top of their feed. However, you can also post the assignment link by clicking copy link. I tended to embed mine a lot, so that way when they were on my classroom website, they could see it right away and click on it from there. But again, that's totally a personal preference. Now, if they have the embed code, that's this one, or the link code, and it's the first time they entered the class, it will ask them if they want to join the class. They can just click join. Or you can go to your classes and you can invite your students this way, or by giving them a link, or by giving them the specific code. So very much your choice, or again, you can add with Google Classroom as well. And I can't remember exactly where that is at this moment, but it is around here somewhere. I'm just kind of blanking on it at the moment. So if you want to connect, and actually it's probably because I don't have any Google Classroom set up right now, but you can connect it up with your Google Classroom. So that is pretty much the 4 steps for flipping your classroom. I'm going to talk just about a couple more things real quick, some tips and tricks. Give you guys a moment to drop some comments if you have any into the live chat. But if you don't, that is okay. But I'm going to try to answer some of those in just a moment if you do have any questions. At the end of this presentation, which if you did not get earlier is just bit.ly/4 steps for flipping. There are some examples of flipped classroom lessons. This video will be available on this link, but I also have another video of this one as well. Links to EdPuzzle, Screencastify, and a Wacom tablet. The Wacom tablet, I don't know if it's for sale anymore. We were just trying to purchase some for our school, but that's what I was talking about. It was kind of a little screen, or it's something that you plug into. Looks kind of like a mouse pad almost, but it's not. And you could just write on it. And it was really great when I didn't have a touch screen device at the time. So that's linked there, but I don't know if they're still selling it. Everything seems to be sold out technology-wise in like the world right now. But a couple of final thoughts and just some quick recommendations. Start small. and avoid making too many things at once because I think it can become very overwhelming. I was kind of in a unique position of teaching a class that nobody else was teaching. So I made all the videos on my own, which was a lot of work. I highly suggest that if you are in a PLC that you take advantage of that opportunity because you could certainly share some of that load with each other. So that way you could say, well, you create this presentation and record it, and then I'll do this one and that one. It just will give you a little bit more sanity because even one a week just is more work than you think it is. So start out with maybe a couple a month, but try not to overwhelm yourself and just start slow. Like I said, collaborate with other teachers. And then last one, and this might be one that's on everybody's mind, but don't be afraid of technology issues. All right. The number one thing that I would always hear from teachers when I've done this presentation is, well, what if they don't have internet from home? So I flipped my classroom for almost 5 years. And in the 5 years, and this was from regular to collaboration classes, which means that those also included some students that were on IEPs. Out of all those students, which are probably 150 a year, I only had one student that ever truly did not have internet at home. And I would not say that we're in a high socioeconomic area. Okay, I would say our area is overall very low socioeconomic status. And the reason that I say that is because what I would do is sometimes kids would say, well, I don't have internet at home. And a couple things there. They just, one, maybe weren't always telling me the truth, or two, didn't understand that like they could do it on their phone or there were different methods of being able to access it. So I would always call home and just have a quick conversation with the parents and say, hey, your child let me know that you guys don't have internet at home to be able to do these notes. Here are some different options of what we can do. 99% of the time, the parents would say, wait, what? We absolutely have internet at home. They can do this. Or I would suggest, hey, do you have like free access on your phone or unlimited data? That's what I'm looking for. And then they could watch it on their phone because EdPuzzle has an app. Again, out of all those students, which I'm probably thinking is over 500 easily, only one ever didn't have the ability to be online. And right now there's a lot of companies because of distance learning that are actually offering free Wi-Fi for a limited number of time. So don't be afraid of the technology issues. There's always a way around it. Now, with my one student that didn't have internet, he had a lot of different options. So he could come in at lunch and do it. He could come to my tutoring hours and do it. He could do it during his study hall. He had a lot of different things put into place for him. So that way he could still do that. I think that's pretty much it. I'm not seeing any comments. I see one comment and I agree. Screencastify and EdPuzzle are just vital. I absolutely love them. The thing I would just tell you to keep in mind is what is the reason that you're doing it? Try to make sure that there's a purpose for it and that that purpose is student-centered and that whatever you are sending home is meaningful and achievable for them and their families. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any other questions, I'm going to just put my contact information here at the end. You can see my email, my Twitter information, and my website also has a form that you can submit if you have any questions. So if you do have any, please don't hesitate to reach out and have a wonderful day.